Hi, my name, Paul Cross. I'm professor at Humber College. I teach radio. This video is produced using Lightboard technology at the Centre for Teaching and Learning at Humber College in Toronto. There was a flip there in the video, and that will become apparent why when I do some writing later on. This video includes closed captioning, which can be turned on or off as you wish. It also includes a full text of the script of everything I'm speaking today, which can be used for translation or for reading or for conversion. And there's a podcast available of the audio. I believe very strongly in the concept of design for differentiated learning for my students at Humber. I want all of my students to be as successful as they can be in the courses I teach. Most of the courses I teach at Humber have to do with radio news. Now, I know that when many students come to Humber to study radio, they do not imagine themselves working in a radio newsroom. They see themselves being involved in entertainment and playing the music and working in studios in the things they think will be fun about radio. But I think that by using a strategic approach to teaching radio news skills and showing students how they translate into the real radio station workplace, I think this can be very successful. So my strategic approach involves explaining the radio skills I teach in class and learning materials that include recorded radio examples, podcasts that explain points from class, original resource documents that I write and post to Blackboard, Lightboard videos such as this, social media that tags them by course name, and an ongoing urging to listen to radio, to listen to how radio professionals are using these skills that we talk about in class, how radio is using them every day. And I think this really helps connect with a variety of learners. An important part of design for differentiated learning is something called authentic assessment. When I approached the Centre for Teaching and Learning, I realized that much of what I do in assessing the assignments my students submit really is authentic assessment. The progressive thematic assignments let students demonstrate their developing, building news skills and show how they are learning to apply their radio news skills. I can demonstrate to them how the work they do in their courses translates directly into the things they would do in a radio station newsroom in a real professional working environment. So here's a quick sketch of that for you. In news development class, all 6 assignments in the first semester are connected, starting with A1. Assignment 1 is writing an effective lead sentence after we have talked about radio news style and how to get that going, present tense, active language, that kind of thing. A2 is analyzing a professional radio newscast to hear how the newscaster is following that style and how they're using audio. In A3, students are further developing their writing skills, working from a news tip and writing a complete story. That's before midterm. After midterm, we get into A4, where they're really ramping up their skills now, and A4 has them submit their first radio news interview, and they have to select a piece of audio from it around which they would write a story. A5 follows that. They're required to do a report, we call it a voicer, based on the story they identify within A4. And then A6, their final assignment is a full radio newscast, which also includes a story based on their work from A4 and A5. Along the way, students get feedback, of course, and their work is assessed according to a rubric that follows the general grading criteria followed by Humber. I can assess each criteria to be graded using a scalable marking grid, and each skill to be assessed is assigned a grade that shows a student's strength in that area and areas needing improvement. It's also important to note here, I think, that a variety of ways can be used for students to complete these assignments. So certainly they can do some of this work in a radio studio. Much of it is done using a portable handheld recorder that produces broadcast quality audio, so they can do that at a time and location of their choice. Much of the work they need to do can be done on their own home laptop or their home computer. Of course, they could also work in a computer lab in the School of Media Studies. And if they use any assistive technology, certainly that can be applied to their writing and to the other work they need to complete in the assignments. Now here's an illustration of how this authentic assessment shows students how they would do this work in a real radio station, as I was mentioning earlier. This work takes place over a number of weeks. Assignment 4, where we really start to ramp up the skills, that comes in about week 9. They get some feedback on it, and then assignment 5, A5, the voicer that arises from A4, that comes in about week 12, and they get some feedback on it. And then A6, which is using some of the material from A4 and A5, that comes in about week 14. So we've shown how this unfolds over a number of weeks in the semester for the students learning these skills, but then I can tell them how it applies very directly to how this would take place in a newsroom. And here's the example I give. A4, because you already have these background skills. A4, as a reporter, your assignment is to do an interview. You need to do that at 10 o'clock in the morning. A5, the voicer, that needs to be ready at 11 o'clock in the morning because the newscaster on air needs some of your material from your interview so they have a story for their newscast. Now, A6, an actual newscast, using a story from this, well, this is you now as the reporter taking over the desk, we call it, and doing the afternoon news, which is quite not at all unusual in a radio station. And you have your first newscast maybe at 12 noon or 1 p.m., and of course you need a story based on your interview. So this shows now how what we've done over a number of weeks really comes down to a matter of that happens in a couple of hours every day in your radio newsroom, and it's just part of your day. It's a very authentic assessment. And of course, in the workplace, the boss is wondering how well did that reporter do on that? How is the newscast using that material? How do they sound using their own information on air? You're always being critiqued in radio, and there's a great deal of attention paid to what you're doing on air. Of course, there's a Lightboard video similar to this that explains this process to students and how it all comes together. They seem to quite appreciate that. And of course, there's a podcast that sounds just like real radio. I'm at Paul Cross, Torrent. I'm Paul Cross. Thank you.